difficulty, and no one wants to go back there. But we also have to find a way forward that people feel that they have the right to protest, and police know that they can be with people who are peacefully protesting and not use force. It's not just important for us to ensure that there's accountability in the short term. We must also ensure that it works towards in weeks and months to come, and processes we put in place have to include community input. I was able to meet with some of the protesters today who want their voice at the table, talking about the changes they think need to be made. The chief and I will continue to meet with them, to listen to them, and to include others in the community, so many are at the table, including members of the Community Police Commission who have that very special role in our community. Over the last few days, I've heard many in the community expressing a number of issues. Some of those we want to make sure that we can take off the table immediately. For example, many have expressed concern about the mourning badges, and we've talked about the importance to police officers in acknowledging the loss of an officer. But the public wants apparently to know this badge number, even if the name is present. So Chief Best and I have discussed it, and we will change the policy at the Seattle Police Department so officers can wear mourning badges, but there is a way that a badge number is always displayed. That won't happen overnight, but it is a change we will make. We also know that there's a shift in sentiment related to body-worn video. Many people who are on the streets don't understand why the body-worn video hasn't been turned on. Many who have been around this a while may remember that this decision came before I was mayor in discussions with the ACLU and the city council and the mayor at the time, that out of concerns for civil rights, they did not want to have peaceful demonstrations recorded. I am going to ask the city council and the Community Police Commission to reconsider that policy, to speak with the ACLU and listen to community to determine whether body-worn video should be activated at all times and whether there's other things we can do to protect civil liberties. For example, we could have a rule that said that any video of a lawful gathering or people protesting could be utilized only for very limited circumstances. For example, if there was a complaint against a police officer for OPA, or if there was a criminal investigation for other regards. We want to limit the ability. I don't know what those are, but I think that issue should be revisited, and I'm going to ask the City Council, then the CPC and the ACLU, who had reached the agreement to have that prohibition and restriction, to look at whether we should have a different policy going forward. As I've mentioned over the last few days, the mourning badges were used to recognize fallen officers. And it is the policy of the Seattle Police Department that every officer displays their name. I have asked, and there's no circumstance or case that we're aware of where an officer was the target of the complaint. When they knew their name, they couldn't find the officer. But it's a matter of public confidence. People believed it was done for a different purpose, and it's an easy thing for us to change. And so we will. We want to respect the honor that police officers give to those who lose their life in the line of duty, but we understand that the public wants to have the badge number and the name. We're going to find a way to get that done. I also want to be clear that I know that when I say that the Seattle Police Department has made great progress and reforms, it's true. But saying that doesn't mean that we're done. I investigated the police department almost 10 years ago and signed the consent decree and understand the challenges that have been involved. But I also will state again, the gains they have made are real. But just because we have made real gains does not mean we are finished. No one is more certain about that than Chief Carmen Best. She believes in and demands a culture of continuous improvement. When she sees officers, policies, or procedures that she believes are contrary to the community good, she is the first person to demand change. We have to make sure that acknowledging progress the people also don't hear that that denies the truth that communities have felt for generations, or the truth about the racial injustice in policing and the criminal justice system. We know that the promise of America has not been made real for all Americans. That is the solemn obligation of all of us to make that more real. So while we can show you that under the consent decree, through policies and training and embedding the ability for crisis management has made a difference on the street and the number of people who have been helped because of it, we also hear the deep concerns, and we will listen to those concerns. The work for reform always continues. I have been involved in police and criminal justice reform for almost 40 years. And you never get to a final destination because the reality on the street changes, our nation evolves, and we must make sure that the systems evolve to actually be part of a system of justice. When I met with some African American leaders earlier this week, one of the ministers I talked to said that when he saw the death of Mr. Floyd and the 4 officers who were involved, it reminded him of the American systems. There was one system that intentionally killed Mr. Floyd, 2 who held him down, and another who just turned away. We have to change that. We have to change it in our hearts, in our attitudes, in our actions, in our systems. So what happens next? First, I want to be clear that it is existing policy in the Seattle Police Department and will continue to be policy that any allegation of misconduct will be investigated by a civilian-led, independent Office of Police Accountability. The Office of Police Accountability has received over 12,000 complaints so far since the beginning of these protests. Our system, our accountability system, both OPA and OIG, will be tested. And there could never be a more important moment that they have the resources and confidence of the public. So as I said, we will make sure that in the budget that OPA and OIG have the resources they need to do the job they need to do to give the public the confidence that the oversight is there. Second, the Office of Inspector General plays a really critical role in recommending systemic changes. OPA looks at individual actions, and OIG, Office Inspector General, looks at systemic changes. It's an incredibly important thing on an ongoing basis. In many ways, the Office of Inspector General is stepping into the shoes that the court monitor has played, to be a watchdog, to investigate, to audit, to make sure that the systems are functioning like they should. And if there needs
We are reaching the 6 o'clock hour. We want to assure our viewers that we're still watching this press conference happening right now, and you can watch it at king5.com as the mayor continues to speak, as well as the police chief.
Interesting, Jessica, the mayor laying out clear direction for what she is hoping to accomplish in the days to come, and really restating this fact that every police interaction with the public, she said, adds to or takes away from public trust, and reaffirming that the Office of Police Accountability will have full funding to be able to investigate some 12,000 allegations of misconduct. We're keeping tabs on all of this for you right here on King 5. More local news back here at 6:30.
confidence. We have those reports, but that's just a beginning. It's what we do with that information and the steps we take going forward to determine what are the causes and reasons for those. How do we build in the system better so the disparities don't exist? There's no system in America where there are not any disparities, but we have to be unflinching in our willingness to look at our department. I will say that We will continue to monitor all the activities as they go, and the chief in real time is trying to make sure that we are both supporting peaceful protests and the right to exercise First Amendment rights, while at the same time ensuring public safety. Saturday night showed how those two things can sometimes work in opposition to each other. And we had two very different types of events going on almost simultaneously in blocks of each other. Thousands of people in downtown Seattle coming to protest not just the death of Mr. Floyd, but the treatment of people of color, particularly Black Americans, over generations, and to demand that it stop. They protested, they talked, they speak, they grieved, they shared their common trauma and experience, and they marched to the courthouse. There was no confrontations. Almost simultaneously at the same time, many other people came in who had a very different intent on their mind, and we saw the impacts of that. Policing in a very confined place with those two very different realities going on was a reality for the police department and very fluid, and they will have to adjust on every day on the circumstances in front of them. But I am committed, and the chief is committed, to make sure we do all we can to make sure that people can march peacefully, that we avoid any criminal activity, but that we also do what we can as a police department in a city to ensure that things are de-escalated if possible. The city is looking for better ways to incorporate accountability, reform, restorative justice in our police department in ways that don't have to be bargained with SPOG, but can be done through a process together. But we also know that we have a contract that expires. We've told the court that there are 4 areas we want to make sure that we focus on related to accountability. The council and the mayor together decide parameters for those negotiations. But it's clear from what is happening in the streets that we need to listen to voice more. And we need people to understand what works now and listen to them on what they think demand of other changes. So we will listen and continue to set up a process where we can actively engage community in a better and more fundamental way to have them feel ownership of their police department. I have heard loud voices in the streets talking about the need for change. But I've heard many, many voices also telling me again how much they support the men and women of the Seattle Police Department, and how when they dial 911, they are thankful that the fire department or the police department shows up when they're needed and helps them. We can be proud of that as a city, but being proud of their work does not mean that we don't also acknowledge we can always be better and address concerns that people have and address community trust. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, we always need to answer the question about how can we be better? How do we do that in this context? How do we take the energy from the righteous message we hear on the street and transfer that energy into change that is durable and systemic and brings us all to a better place? I have worked, as I said, in police reform areas for almost 40 years, from the sentencing guideline commissions to trying to get alternatives to incarceration for people convicted of drugs use, to setting up drug courts, to working on the oversight panel that created the need of an independent civilian oversight in the OPA, to others that led to different changes, and then finally as U.S. Attorney, doing the investigation and negotiating the consent decree. I am fully and 100% committed to making sure that we continue to have a police force that acts as a community protector, as a guardian. And again, I think we have seen officers act with a great deal of grace, but we've also seen ways that we can be better. And both of those things can be true at the same time. There is not going to be anyone more demanding of police accountability and a strong police department or to showing the police respect than their chief, Carmen Best. She knows, as I know, that true public safety, at the end of the day, doesn't come from a police force. It comes from true equality, true equity, and true respect and dignity. The best public safety is equal access to health care, to education, to economic justice, knowing that you and your families not only will be safe, but have a shot at anything you want. That's what I've worked for in 2 years as mayor. I will double down to work for it harder, and I know that we must continue to listen to the voices on the street. With that, I will give you Chief Best.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for allowing me to join you this afternoon as you were talking to many of the demonstrators outside. First of all, I want to acknowledge and remember why we are here today and what brought us to this point: the murder of George Floyd. The nation and our community are angry and they're heartbroken. We are grieving, and in this grief, many people are coming together to protest and to demonstrate. And we at the Seattle Police Department, we support that. We support the rights of everyone to express their constitutionally protected free speech. We have a long history of facilitating free speech at protests and demonstrations, and nothing has changed. Over the last several days, though, we have had thousands of people who have come to demonstrate and protest, and we thank the many groups who came here peacefully in paying homage to Mr. Floyd. The right to speak your voice is something we all honor and we cherish as Americans. I have heard from many of our officers and commanders that they too are outraged and dismayed by the officers' actions in Minneapolis. We take our oath of office to serve and to protect, and it is a sacred one. I even saw one of our officers, one of our captains and a lieutenant, take a knee, as the mayor talked about. They took a knee yesterday with demonstrators on Capitol Hill. While I wasn't standing alongside them physically, my heart was with them. Our city and our country are aching, and we are at a tipping point. Something has to change, and we need to heal. But just after this beautiful act, this wonderful act of solidarity outside of our East Precinct last night, rocks, bottles, and other projectiles were hurled at officers. One officer was struck in the face with a large piece of concrete, and several more officers sustained injuries. In an attempt to deal and address the crowd, they did use less lethal munitions. And I know that many people have concerns about what happened on East Precinct last night. All of that information will be reviewed by Andrew Meyerberg, who is the head of the Office of Police Accountability. There's a process here. So for any time, as the mayor mentioned, any time that there's a question about police activity, about if they're following the rules and regulations, we have an objective, independent accountability person, Andrew Meyerberg of the Office of Police Accountability, who will look at each and every one of those cases and review it and make that initial determination. So we have already made sure that Director Meyerberg has that information. He had a conversation with the mayor today. As noted, there were over 12,000 complaints over the last 4 days. Each of those, everything will be reviewed, documented, and the answer provided, not only to the public but to me. And we will make sure that whatever that is, that we're working to move forward to improve conditions, improve tactics, and improve responses. Since the beginning of this, we have made 86 arrests. These arrests have been for assault and burglary, obstruction, and property destruction. We facilitate dozens of protests every year. In many cases, in most cases, we don't arrest anybody. The past few days, though, they have been very different. They're different than anything our officers have seen. There's been rioting, there's been looting and attacking and ambushing and damaging property, and in many ways causing chaos. At the same time, on the heels of that, there are many people who came just to express their right to free speech. We accept and we respect and we honor that right, but we can't allow people to come into the city and destroy property and assault people and commit burglaries. The actions of a few are overthrowing a sincere message of peace, a type of peace that our entire nation needs so badly in order to heal. You know, last night in St. Louis, we had 4 officers shot during a night of violence and destruction. In Las Vegas, a police officer was shot and remains in critical condition. We have to make sure that as we are expressing our rights, as we are, showing our rage and our disillusion, that we do so in a way where people don't get hurt. We are all one community. We are in this together. So we need to act that way and treat it that way. I will also remind you that with the curfew that we had employed, it will go on until Saturday morning at 5 a.m., not the whole time, from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. for the next few days until Saturday morning. We're using this as a tool to help us make sure that we can do everything that we can to keep all of us safe as we're out there in the field with the protests and the demonstrations. In closing, I will remind everyone that the Seattle Police Department will continue to support everyone's right to free speech and demonstrations. We just can't tolerate the acts of violence, hurting one another, hurting property, and damaging property and buildings and cars. Seattle, I know we are better than that. So I thank you for these few moments I've had. Thank you. And next, Chief Scoggins.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Harold Scoggins, Fire Chief of the Seattle Fire Department. These last few days have been very moving, and seeing so many things going on in so many places at the same time. From people really speaking up and voicing their thoughts and on change and growth and all those things, to the disaster and destruction, and it's really been hard to watch. But I got to tell you, this afternoon I was inspired a little bit when we got a chance to go out there. It was inspirational, seeing the young people and the energy and the passion that they have for working to focus and drive change. That was really good. And over the last several days, we've responded to a lot of emergencies. And just last night, yesterday, we responded to 18 emergencies, and 14 were medically related and 4 were fire related. But I want to say thank you to the majority of the protesters, because you're doing what we asked. You're protesting peacefully. You're navigating your way around the community. You're expressing your thoughts and opinions, and you're pushing to drive change. And you're doing a great job with that. And we see it and we appreciate it. But I do want to remind everyone who's out there that we are still in the middle of a pandemic. And we in the fire department, we've been on the front lines with the PD and the city for the last 3 months, working to bend the curve with physical distancing, with wearing masks, with washing your hands. And these large gatherings do have us a bit concerned. So here's my ask. If you have been out in large groups and protesting, monitor your health. Monitor if you're having headaches, if you're having coughs that you didn't have before, if you're feeling weak, if you have a temperature, and all those things. These are all the signs and symptoms of COVID-19. I would ask that you pull back for a little bit, isolate and quarantine a little bit, and go get yourself checked out, because these are real concerns. So as you continue to protest and march and express your First Amendment rights, we're going to be there to support you. But the goal is to not get those around you sick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for your leadership and for your remarks here tonight. I'd also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our ASL interpreters who joined us to address the crowd earlier today. I want to acknowledge their work and acknowledge their time and thank them for being here today. I will read in our reporters 2 at a time to allow time for questions. Our first reporter will be Deborah Horn, Cairo 7, followed by Kate Walters, KUOW. Deborah Horn, the floor is yours.
I'm just going to bring up the level a little bit though. Nothing happens overnight.
Deborah, we are having a hard time hearing you. We will circle back to you. We will move on to Kate Walters. Kate, the floor is yours.
Hi there, can you hear me?
We can.
Fantastic. Chief Best, wanted to ask you about the use of tear gas and flashbangs. Are you directing officers to give appropriate warning and dispersal orders before using tactics like that, as is required under city law? And what do you have to say after seeing what happened in Capitol Hill last night and after some of the reports over the weekend about whether or not the tactics being used appear to be appropriate, with the understanding that a review is going to happen, but just your reaction to it?
Yeah, certainly, Kate. Thank you for asking that. I fully expected a question. So by SMC, Seattle Municipal Code, and by our own policy, officers should give a dispersal order before using flashbangs. But as the law states, it's when it's reasonable, and when it's feasible to do so. So we have to look at every incident and take it on its own merits of what happened at the time, and what evaluations were being made. I know there was a lot of concern, as I mentioned earlier, about what happened on Capitol Hill, and we're going to be looking at every aspect of what happened. I saw the video that all of you saw. Again, Director Andrew Meyerberg in the Office of Police Accountability will be reviewing that video. Additionally, there's a lot of video from other places, officers' body-worn cameras, and we'll be reviewing every single thing to make sure that everything was within policy, and if it wasn't within policy, to make sure that we hold people accountable. I think one of the most important things that we can do is, as we get complaints in, we review. We look at what we could do to make better tactics and make sure that people are following the rules, the policies, the regulations, and the laws of the city, and all of that will be under review. I look forward to getting as much information as possible, but what I won't do is rush to judgment. I want to make sure that we're being thorough in everything that we're looking at. So I fully expect in short order that there'll be an answer to your questions. And I'm not directing, I'm not in the field, I'm not directing at that moment what happens. I trust and believe in the reliability of the training that officers have before they go out, but we'll make sure that they're following the policies and procedures and the Seattle Municipal Code.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question will be from Deborah Horn, Cairo 7, followed by Daniel Beekman, Seattle Times. Deborah, the floor is yours.
All different backgrounds, but they all have the one thing. And one thing is to stop violence against young individuals, young black.
We will come back. Daniel Beekman from Seattle Times, followed by Justin Carter. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And this is a question for the mayor, but also the chief, if she wants to chime in. I heard that you told protesters and organizers that you'd be back tomorrow to talk about changes going forward. Other than the badge issue, what's a big systemic change that you're going to bring to the table as something to suggest?
So Dan, thanks for that question. In meeting with the protesters, they made it very clear that they wanted their voices to be heard, and they wanted the chief and I to listen to them on the changes they thought needed to be made, and they wanted a plan for real change. And so we're starting tomorrow. It will take a process. We want to make sure that we include groups like the Community Police Commission that's done deep work in this area, other members of the community. And most importantly, while we have identified changes that we want to make to the department over the last year that have been part of both public pleadings and city council hearings, we want to center this on the community's voice and the community's experience. And so structurally, we first want to hear from them and talk to them about which changes are most important. And also, many of them don't know what process is already in place, so find a way that we can reach the public to engage community in a way so they understand, for example, how complaint process works, how they can complain, how police are held accountable. Some of the things they suggested as to today are already in place, and so we have to find other ways to strengthen the things that are in place and then make sure the community knows what's available to them.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Justin Carter, Capitol Hill, Seattle, followed by Robert Schaefer, Fox News. Justin, the floor is yours. Justin, we're not getting audio, so we'll circle back to you. Our next question will be Robert Schaefer, Fox News, followed by David Croman, Crosscut. Robert Schaefer has dropped off the call. David Croman from Crosscut will be our next question, followed by Erica Barnett. C is for Crank. David, the floor is yours.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Understanding that there are likely to be cuts to budgets, considering the coronavirus pitfalls, is the police department on the table to be among those cuts?
Is that to me, David? To Jenny?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
you. Thanks.
Every department has been given instructions to find places to cut. The police department is a little more difficult because it's mostly in salaries, but we were able to do a number of savings in the police department last year, and we redirected that money to criminal justice reform efforts, including disruption of youth violence, providing more opportunity for youth. We will continue to look at not just what is necessary in the budget, but I think that what we know from not just what's been going on the last 4 days, but I think this pandemic has laid bare in probably the most stark way possible the deep inequities in our system. The first people to feel the impacts, both health-wise and economic-wise, are the same communities that have been disadvantaged in every other place. And we have had to, in very short order, we had to change and orient how we do business as a city. Where before we had senior programming in senior centers, suddenly those seniors couldn't go to those senior centers, and we had to change it to a meal program. We had to provide grocery vouchers for people, provide food for our food banks and rent relief, money for our small businesses. So this budget is very much going to be a budget that focuses on, first, how do we continue to provide for those communities that have been most impacted by the economic and health downturns of what we've seen under the coronavirus, and continue those programs that we know work. And then every department, they have had two things, is we need to know what do they need to do that's COVID related, what do they need for basic services, and then what are the other things that serve community. And we are going department by department to make sure that we are focusing resources in that way. It's going to be based on values, and every department has been doing that kind of analysis.
Thank you, Mayor. Our next question will be from Erica Barnett. C is for Crank.
Hi. The individuals who were chosen to go inside and meet with the mayor and the chief today sounded a lot different in tone and their emphasis on going slow and taking small steps than many of the protesters that we've heard from so far. How were they chosen and identified? And on what basis does the mayor's office consider them to be the leaders of the protests?
Is that to the mayor or the chief, Erica?
That's to the mayor.
Okay. We did not select. The protesters came, and we asked whether they had asked whether they could meet with the chief and I, and we said yes. And so they chose who came into the room. We did not choose. It would not be appropriate for us to do so. And we had a brief dialogue just so we knew who we were talking to, but they emphasized very strongly that they were there as representative only, and that there were many people that we needed to go back outside and address the crowd. It was very important to them that we do so and not just meet in a room with a select few. And so that's why you saw both things happen. It is not my role as mayor, the chief's role as chief, or any of us to decide who are the leaders of community. Community decides that at every level, and those are the voices that have to be raised. And so I also think, as I said, that when we go forward and really determine going forward a number of things that do in our police department, how we build trust, it's going to require a lot of different voices to be heard. Theirs are some, but they are not exclusive.
Thank you, Mayor. And our next and final question will be from Eugene Johnson, Associated Press, Seattle.
Hi, this is Gene. Mayor Durkan, what is the point of having this 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew? Is it being enforced, and how does it fit in with your request to the marchers that they continue marching?
Gene, thank you for that question. I'm actually going to let the chief answer that question because, again, based on the recommendation of the police department and the chief, and based on the operational needs that they had is why the curfew is continuing. You notice that it has been moved later rather than starting at 6 p.m. It starts at 9 p.m., but I'm going to let the chief address that for you.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you for your question. I want to tell you, we take a lot of thought and care before we ask, and before I have asked the mayor to implement the curfew. We certainly don't want to be an oppressive force, and we don't want people to not have their freedoms, but we also have a real due diligence and responsibility to use every tool that we can to make sure that we keep the city safe. I know that you probably, if not you, some of your colleagues certainly were out on Saturday night and on Friday night when there was massive property destruction, looting,